Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. Thank you for watching today. So first things first, I hope you all had a great fall break. One of the good things about, taking what would normally be a 14-week online course and spreading it out over 16 weeks is that we get to build in some time like that. Like people in seated classes on campus, they get to have some time off. So why shouldn't people in online classes get to have some time off? So I hope you all were able to enjoy at least a little bit of your time last week. So this week we're getting back into the swing of things and we're talking about Bootstrap, or we're starting to talk about Bootstrap. And we have a decent amount of time scheduled to talk about Bootstrap. So our Bootstrap module actually encompasses 3 weeks here. And, part of that's probably going to be useful for you all to, just kind of take some time and maybe get caught up if you haven't caught up on some stuff, or just get back into the swing of things from being out a week, or maybe just getting you all accustomed to looking at documentation, because that's one of the big things that we're going to be focusing on in this module in particular, is how we look at documentation for a tool to help us learn how to use a tool. So today I'm just going to introduce Bootstrap to you, show you all a few things. Should be a very short live class today. Starting next week, we'll get into doing some more hands-on, highly technical demonstrations. But for this week, I just want to kind of ease into Bootstrap, mostly talking today, fewer discussions. But we have the next 2 live classes for demonstrations on Bootstrap. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is just what exactly is Bootstrap. And so Bootstrap is a free front-end framework for faster and easier web development. And I have people come to me from time to time and they say, I really like writing code. I really like doing development. But this design stuff, it's challenging to me. I find it hard. Right? It's easy for me to write code, but it's hard for me to make my website look good. Or they might say something like, I don't necessarily know what looks good, right? Like, I know what I want to say and what I want to put out there, but I don't know how to make it look good, or I struggle at making it look good. Or even a third thing, right, is I don't have time to make it look good. Right? I need to get this information out there for a project or to do this thing. I don't have time to make it look good. And so these are things that Bootstrap can help us with. It's going to allow us to do what we call rapid prototyping, which is a term that we'll look at here in a few minutes, in a manner that is quicker and easier. It does a lot of the styling for us, so we don't have to worry about it. Where if we kind of think about things in perspective and we look at what we were doing with jQuery, and we said that jQuery allowed us to do some JavaScript stuff quicker and easier, Bootstrap allows us to do some CSS stuff quicker and easier. Right? It's a framework where a team of people have already done a whole lot of work on the back end, coming up with a design system, coming up with a series of colors, coming up with fonts and all this other sort of stuff, to where we don't have to worry about it. We can just plug this into our site and we can go. And it's actually a very commonly used tool. right? Because Bootstrap can look very bootstrappy, for lack of a better word, right? Like it can like a website that's built in Bootstrap can look very much like it's built in Bootstrap. But you can also still do some customizations, right? Like you can use certain bits of CSS from Bootstrap to do certain things quicker, and then add some custom CSS that you write to do things that look more custom. So for example, if we think back to what the Cleveland Community College website used to look like before the current one's its own thing, but the one before the current one was actually built on a WordPress theme that utilized Bootstrap. And it didn't utilize a lot of the design elements in Bootstrap. Like it didn't utilize a lot of the Bootstrap colors or a lot of or the Bootstrap fonts or a lot of these, Bootstrap layouts or things of that nature. But it did use the Flexbox system that's built into it for aligning content, which is something that we'll talk about probably next week, I think. But if we look at big websites, there are actually a lot of big websites that use Bootstrap in some form or fashion, right? Like if we think, just looking at a list here that I've pulled up, the MasterCard website utilizes Bootstrap, and we might even be able to look at some of these here. Let's try out the MasterCard website. Let's see if we can find it. Let's see if this article that I'm reading is true, and that the MasterCard website does use Bootstrap. Let's just see, right? Because in this article that I'm reading here, where I just pulled up companies that use Bootstrap in their website, it says that as of 2021, MasterCard was using Bootstrap. So let's see if they are. And it kind of looks likely to me, just based on some of the things I'm seeing here. But let's do a little bit of deep diving here. Let's look at our inspect element tool here. See if we can find any bootstrappy elements in here that would give us an indication that this was built with Bootstrap. And so I'm looking for certain things when I'm looking for, and it seems like they might have changed or they might have updated here, but we'll find. I'm looking for certain things, certain stylings, certain items, be able to tell that this uses Bootstrap. And so far I'm not seeing them, so maybe this website this article here that I'm looking at is just a little bit out of date. We can look at some of the other ones that they call out. Because this all looks fairly custom. I mean, we could look at something like their CSS asset here and just see that looks like. Yeah, and that looks fairly custom. So maybe this article is a little bit out of date. Maybe they've redesigned their website since then. We can look at some of the other things. I know Twitter, the website Twitter used to be completely built on Bootstrap, because it used to be called Twitter Bootstrap. I think they might have gone away from that a little bit now. Let's look at something like maybe, let's try maybe LinkedIn. They say LinkedIn. Or let's try Upwork. Upwork's another one that they mention here. So let's see what Upwork. So if we look in the body of the site here for Upwork, now here we see some Bootstrap elements. So this actually does look likely that Bootstrap is being used here. Because if I look and we see things here like, let me zoom in here so you all can see this a little bit better. This here, span 12, span-md-6, span-lg-7. Things like mb-0 here as classes. Having this container class here, this class of container. These are all very much Bootstrap classes. And so we see a lot of these built in here. So I can actually think that the article is right here. If we look in the head here, we might be able to find their Bootstrap style. Let's see. Oh, that content delivery network that they're using there should look familiar to some of you. All right, we can see that Upwork here is using Cloudinary to serve their images. So that's pretty cool. That's another good example of something that we do in class, or something that we use in class being used in the real world. That's pretty cool. All right, they use Cloudinary there as their content delivery network for images on their page. Here's some styles. Would probably be linked in these styles somewhere if we found it. All this is kind of messy. They should clean this up a little bit. It's in there somewhere. They might have it. You know, some sites, just to like, so they can kind of say that they don't use Bootstrap, will bury it, or they'll import it into another file or something like that. But we can see here from some of these classes that are being used that it is very likely. All right, things like MB0 here. If we go ahead and look at the Bootstrap documentation, which I had pulled up for us here that I was going to do later on. If we search MB-0, where is it? I think that's in content typography, maybe. It also could be an older version of Bootstrap. This is Bootstrap 5. B dash. Some of these, oh, it's spacing, it's margin. It's margin bottom 0. That's what it is. Yes, of course. Sometimes you forget. But that is a margin bottom 0 class that is specific to Bootstrap. So when you see MB-0 on that, that is margin bottom 0. And they have MB-1, MB-2, and these are M numbers, right? So it would be like margin bottom 1M, margin bottom 2M. But as we go through, especially in the coming weeks, we're going to just kind of work our way through some of the documentation here. We won't do everything because we don't really need to do everything that's in the documentation. But we'll definitely do like a lot of the stuff in the layout, a lot of the stuff in the content, some of the component, and just a lot of the stuff that's in here in general. And here's the spacing. So we should be able to see MB0 in here. Yep. So we see 0 here for that can be used for margin or padding. We see M, and we see the side that it's on. So MB-0 would be margin bottom 2. So that allows us to confirm that the Upwork website does in fact utilize Bootstrap, which is cool. Some other sites that article says uses Bootstrap are Spotify. The Spotify website uses Bootstrap, or at least used Bootstrap at one time. Duolingo, Postman, Udemy, Snap, Lyft. Of course, we mentioned Twitter. You know, it's starting out as Twitter Bootstrap. So we'll come back here to this getbootstrap.com site here in just a few moments. Before we do that, let's head back over to our presentation. So the big thing about Bootstrap that we're doing here is that we're able to quickly and easily create nice designs and create responsive design, right? Because it has all these tools built in. And so Bootstrap has a bit of a history to it. Right, it was developed by Mark Otto and Jacob Thornton at Twitter in 2011. Right, so it was one of these special projects at Twitter that starts out as an internal project, right? So it's an internal project just to help them build and work on things quickly and easily. Gets them a design system that they can use with their website and does all this stuff. But then they realize, right, that like, hey, other people could use this too. So they open source it, put it out on GitHub. Right, if we go to GitHub, we can actually see Bootstrap on GitHub. So let's see if I can just pull that up really quickly here, so you all can see that. And so we can look at it here. Here's the Bootstrap repository. You can see it's a public repository. It's open source. We know after learning about GitHub, right? We can look at this and see, like, we know what a lot of this means. We can see that there are 134 pull requests, or 134 people have made changes to the code that they're waiting to get merged into the code base. What they'll do, since they put this out publicly, is they will basically do like versioning, right? So they will go, and when they're ready to push a new version, they will mass merge a lot of these pull requests at one time. And we can also see issues here. So, you know, if you all want to try your hand at maybe working on an open source project a little bit, doing something with Bootstrap, you can kind of go through here, look at the issues, maybe find one that, you know, isn't being worked on or hasn't been assigned, and just trying it out. You know, since this is primarily HTML and CSS, you know, some of this stuff could be things that you all could handle. But we can, you can go through there and see all the direct code. It's easy to use. It's responsive. It has a mobile first approach, which it's had a mobile first approach since Bootstrap 4. We're now in Bootstrap 5. Not much has changed between Bootstrap 4 and Bootstrap 5. Most of the key things are exactly the same. One of the big things that kind of changed is that they moved from jQuery JavaScript plugins to just plain old JavaScript plugins. But it's compatible with all modern browsers, regardless of the browser that you use, Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari, Opera, whatever you use. It is compatible. And so to get Bootstrap, we've already seen that just a little bit. You go to getbootstrap.com. And so we can follow the instructions on getbootstrap.com to be able to get Bootstrap. And so let's just go to getbootstrap.com here. And you know what? Let's make ourselves a little project here. I'm not going to do much with this project. I just want to show you all something really quick about Bootstrap working. So we're not going to do much detail today. I just want to make a really quick HTML file. So let's make an index.html here. Let's exclamation point, let Emmett add our skeleton. Like, this is going to be so simple that I'm not even going to share these documents, right? We're just going to leave them out there on your own. And so I'm just going to add an H1 here that's going to say, hello, world. And I'm going to add a paragraph here that says, like, let's just get some dummy text. Right? Let's just get a dummy text generator and just throw a little bit of dummy text. And this will be kind of the last thing that we do today. And we'll move on to something else. Or we'll just go ahead and end for today, and we'll pick up and actually do stuff with this next week. And usually if we're in class together, since this module falls around Halloween, which it does this time around too, I do a little, as part of this, I do a little Halloween site in Bootstrap. If we were in a seated class, I like to do a little competition with it, but since we're not, we won't. We'll pull up this live site here, and we can just see I just have some plain text here on a basic website. Right? You've all seen stuff like this before. This, takes you back to some of your first websites that you made, way back when we were just starting to make websites in CTI 110. Right? The website looks pretty basic. So a couple things that I want you all to note. I want you all to note the font sizes. I want you all to note the font itself. Right? By default, our font here is a serif font. Our sizes are what they are. And I want you to kind of look at the layout here. Kind of take note of the margin We can see we have a little bit of gap here between our text and the corner of the page. And normally if we'd want to change this, we'd add some CSS or we'd add a CSS file and we'd start going to town writing CSS. And if we were to change a bunch of things, we might write 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or more CSS rules. Here's what we're going to do this time. We're going to go to the Bootstrap website, getbootstrap.com. And we're going to just scroll down the page a little bit, right? And we're going to include via CDN. We're going to include via CDN. You know, we talked about when we were talking about jQuery, we talked about CDNs and why we would use a CDN and you know how useful a CDN is to us. So we're just going to go to getbootstrap.com, scroll down the page a little bit until we see include via CDN. And we see we have 2 options here that we can include. One is our CSS. Right, we know it's a CSS file because it's link href. And we look at it here and it's CSS bootstrap.min.css. The other is a JavaScript. And for our purposes, we're going to ignore the JavaScript. We're not going to worry about the JavaScript for the purposes of this course. We're just going to focus on the CSS. So I'm going to click this little clipboard right here to copy to clipboard. And I'm just going to paste this into the head of my document. So all I did was take that one CDN set of link tags, paste it into my document. Now we're going to save it. Just by doing that, look at the changes. Right, one of the things that you'll notice is that our text is much closer to the edge of the page. Right, and you'll notice that like a lot of the time something that I do is I do a little bit of reset code. You know, I'll do like star margin 0 padding 0 and it'll take the text right up against the edge of the page like that. Well, Bootstrap does that for us here. You can see it changed our font for us, and it's actually using a specialized font. These aren't one of the basic, just standard web fonts. You know, this isn't just general Arial or Helvetica or Tahoma. It's a specialized font. You know, we could even look at it here. If we look at our inspect element, we can look and actually see what font it is. And I believe it's either Roboto or Open Sans. I don't remember. They changed them a while back, so let's see where it tells us. But you can see the font size calculations that it's doing for us, right? It doesn't just have a static pixel font size. Let's zoom in on that. My calculations are 1.375 rem plus 1.5 viewport width. Right, so that lets me know that, hey, this is a responsive size. So hypothetically, if I make my window bigger or smaller, yeah, you see that? Make my window smaller, my heading size shrinks. If I make it bigger, it's a little bit bigger. If we go through here and look at our CSS, in here somewhere. They've got it in a font, or they've got it in a variable. And their variable is so it looks like they have several fonts in this variable. Looks like the default here is going to be I don't really know how to pronounce SEGOUUI. If you have that font on your machine, it'll do that. But the second one there is Roboto. So if you have Roboto on your machine, it'll do that. Helvetica New. A lot of sans serif options, a lot of fallbacks there. To try to make sure that it looks good, right? So it's got a lot of fallbacks. And that's another thing that Bootstrap does a lot, is it uses a lot of variables to set certain values. Which CSS variables, you know, we looked at CSS variables briefly in the 215 course. You know, I did some stuff with them in our lives in there. They're pretty neat, but they're not really, you know, they're not incredibly useful. But if you're making a design system like this, they can be pretty useful, because you can take a color code like we see here and put it into a variable. And then instead of having to remember that one color code, you can just use the variable. Pretty cool. And so that's all that I want to show you for this week. And so that gets us to about 30 minutes. So I said it was going to be short. So that's where we'll kind of stop next week, or this week. Next week, we'll start getting into the thick of it. We'll start looking at, you know, some of the other things, some of the other classes that are in our getbootstrap.com documentation. We'll just kind of start working with, you'll probably hear it color, and just looking at these colors and talking about what this means and how we can use theme colors and these different kinds of colors that are in here, because they're a little different to use them, because what we see here are actually SAS color maps, which we talk about SAS later on in the course, right? SAS being a CSS preprocessor, so they've actually made these color maps in a preprocessor that gives us different colors. So we'll probably start looking at, you know, these color values. We'll look at the layout stuff here, breakpoints, containers, grids, columns, all that sort of fun stuff. We'll probably look at some of the stuff here in content, typography and images, tables. A lot of the component stuff here also uses the JavaScript plugin, so we'll probably move past a lot of the component stuff. But we will look at some of the utilities and, you know, things for opacity and flex and display and all this kind of stuff as well. We'll do that over the course of the next couple of weeks. So next week, we'll be doing more demonstrations, specifically looking at a lot of these individual elements. And then in the third week, we'll kind of take everything from this week and next week and put it together to make one singular complete site in Bootstrap. And so that's what we'll do. And so that's all that we have for you for today. We'll hold here for questions in case anybody has them. And I think we're probably pretty good for this week. So with that being said, since I'm not seeing any questions, we will wrap things up here for today. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.